What would you do if you discovered that the person you trusted most in the world had been slowly erasing you from existence? Not physically, but piece by piece, your identity, your memories, your very sense of self. Today, I'm sharing a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family, trust, and the quiet strength that lives inside every woman who has ever been underestimated. Welcome to Voices of George. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and like my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. The nursing home smelled of lavender air freshener and something else, something institutional that no amount of fragrance could fully mask. Dr. Elena Vasquez walked down the long corridor, her sensible flats making soft sounds against the linoleum floor. Room 412. Her mother's room. She hadn't visited in 3 weeks. The guilt of that absence sat heavy in her chest, but guilt was a familiar companion these days. Between her position as chief of neurology at St. Catherine's Hospital and raising her teenage son Marcus alone, time had become her most precious and elusive resource. Elena paused outside the door, composing herself. Her mother, Rosa, had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia 2 years ago. The progression had been slow at first, then suddenly terrifyingly fast. Some days Rosa recognized her daughter. Other days, Elena was a stranger with kind eyes. She pushed open the door and froze. The room was empty. The bed was stripped bare, the small nightstand cleared of the family photographs Rosa had insisted on keeping close. The cheerful yellow curtains Elena had hung last spring were gone, replaced with standard hospital-issue white. A cold wave of panic crashed through her body. Elena's heart pounded as she rushed to the nurse's station, her medical training barely keeping the rising panic at bay. "My mother," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Rosa Vasquez, room 412. Where is she?" The young nurse behind the desk looked up with an expression that Elena couldn't quite read. Was it confusion? Discomfort? The girl glanced down at her computer screen, then back at Elena. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no Rosa Vasquez registered here." The words didn't make sense. They were sounds without meaning, syllables that refused to arrange themselves into anything logical. "That's impossible. She's been here for 8 months. I pay the bills myself. Check again." The nurse typed something, her fingers moving with agonizing slowness. "I'm showing that room 412 has been vacant for the past 2 weeks. There's no record of a Rosa Vasquez in our system at all." Elena gripped the edge of the counter. The fluorescent lights above seemed suddenly too bright, the lavender scent too sweet, almost sickening. This was wrong. Everything about this moment was deeply, fundamentally wrong. "I want to speak to the director." Now. 20 minutes later, Elena sat across from Harold Finch, the facility's administrator. He was a soft man in his early 60s, with the kind of practiced sympathy that came from decades of delivering difficult news to desperate families. "Dr. Vasquez, I understand this is distressing," he said, folding his hands on his mahogany desk. "But I've personally reviewed our records. Your mother was never a resident here. I have receipts, bank statements. I've been paying $12,000 a month to this facility." Finch's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Something flickered behind his pale blue eyes. Was it recognition? Fear? "Perhaps there's been some confusion with another facility," he offered, his voice too smooth, too rehearsed. "Families sometimes mix up locations, especially when dealing with the stress of a loved one's illness." Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She was not a woman who confused things. She had spent 30 years building a career on precision, on observation, on trusting the evidence of her own senses. She had operated on human brains. She did not misremember which building held her mother. "I'm going to find out what happened," she said quietly. "And when I do, I'm going to destroy whoever is responsible." Finch's polished composure cracked, just for a moment. Just long enough for Elena to see the truth hiding beneath. He knew something, and whatever he knew, it terrified him. Elena sat in her car in the parking lot, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. The rational part of her brain, the clinical, scientific mind that had served her so well, was screaming that there had to be a logical explanation. But another part of her, the part that had survived a difficult childhood in East Los Angeles, that had clawed her way through medical school while working 2 jobs, that had raised a child alone after her husband's sudden death, that part knew something else entirely. She was not confused. She was not mistaken. Her mother had been here, in this building, in that room. And someone had made her disappear. Elena pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for. A name she hadn't called in over 15 years. Detective Marco Reyes, LAPD retired. Her finger hovered over the call button. Marco had been her brother-in-law, married to her sister Carmen before the accident that took Carmen's life. After the funeral, he had withdrawn from the family, unable to bear the reminder of what he had lost. They had exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, then nothing. But Marco had spent 30 years investigating crimes that others said were unsolvable. If anyone could help her find Rosa, it was him. She pressed call. Marco Reyes answered on the fourth ring. His voice was rougher than Elena remembered, weathered by time and whatever private storms he had been navigating. Elena, is that really you? Marco, I need your help. Something has happened to my mother. There was a pause, heavy with years of silence and unspoken grief. Then Marco spoke again, his tone shifting into something sharper, more focused. The detective emerging from retirement. Tell me everything. They met at a small diner near the waterfront, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and nobody asked questions. Marco looked older, of course. His dark hair had turned silver at the temples, and deep lines bracketed his mouth. But his eyes were the same, alert and piercing, missing nothing. Elena laid out the facts methodically, the way she would present a complex case to her medical team. The nursing home, the empty room, the missing records, the administrator's barely concealed fear. Marco listened without interrupting, his large hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You said you've been paying $12,000 a month. Where does that money go? I set up automatic payments through my bank. The account is listed as Sunrise Senior Living. That's the facility's name. Have you checked your bank records? Verified the account number? Elena felt a chill run down her spine. In her panic, in her desperate rush to find answers, she hadn't done the most basic thing. She hadn't followed the money. She pulled out her phone and logged into her banking app. Her fingers were unsteady as she navigated to her transaction history. There they were, the monthly payments, steady as clockwork for the past 8 months. She tapped on the most recent one and examined the details. The account number. She didn't recognize it. And the recipient name was not Sunrise Senior Living. It was a company called Evergreen Holdings LLC. Marco, she whispered, turning the phone toward him. I've never seen this name before. I didn't authorize payments to this company. Marco studied the screen, his jaw tightening. Someone changed the payment information, redirected your money to a shell company while making you believe everything was normal. But how? I would have received notifications, confirmations. Not if someone had access to your email, your phone, your entire digital life. Marco looked up at her, his expression grim. Elena, who else knows your passwords? Who has access to your accounts? The question hung in the air between them like a blade waiting to fall. Elena's mind raced through the possibilities. Her assistant at the hospital had limited access to her professional accounts, but nothing personal. Her accountant handled her taxes, but not her day-to-day banking. Marcus was a teenager who could barely remember to charge his own phone, let alone orchestrate financial fraud. And then there was David. David Chun had entered Elena's life 18 months ago, appearing like a gift she hadn't known she needed. He was a financial consultant, handsome and attentive, with a warmth that had slowly melted the walls she had built around her heart after her husband's death. He had been patient, so incredibly patient. Never pushing, never demanding. Just present, consistent, reliable. He remembered the little things, her favorite flowers, the way she took her coffee, the anniversary of her husband's passing. 6 months ago, she had given him a key to her house. 3 months ago, she had added him to her family phone plan, the one that synced all her accounts for convenience. She had thought it was a step toward building a future together. Now, sitting in this diner with the bitter coffee growing cold before her, Elena felt the first terrible stirrings of a devastating realization. There's someone, she said slowly, each word costing her something precious. A man I've been seeing. David Chun. I gave him access to everything. Marco's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. Tell me about him. How did you meet? Elena thought back to that first encounter. A charity gala for the hospital. She had been standing alone by the silent auction table, examining a painting she had no intention of bidding on, when he had appeared beside her. He said he admired my work. He had read about a surgery I performed, a complicated tumor removal that had made the medical journals. He was charming, interested. He made me feel seen. The words sounded foolish now, spoken aloud in this harsh fluorescent light. She was a brilliant surgeon, a woman who had built an empire of professional respect through sheer determination. And she had been seduced by flattery, by attention, by the simple human need to not be alone. "Where is he now?" Marco asked. "He's on a business trip. Singapore, supposedly. He left 4 days ago." Marco pulled out a worn notebook and began writing. "I need everything you have on him. Full name, address, phone numbers, any documents he's given you. Business cards, contracts, anything with official information." Elena nodded, already scrolling through her phone. She had photographs of them together, messages filled with sweet words and promises. But as she searched, she realized something strange. She had almost nothing official. No business card, despite his supposed career as a financial consultant. No formal documents. The address she had for him was his apartment, which she now realized she had only visited a handful of times. He always came to her. He always suggested her place, her neighborhood, her preferred restaurants. She had thought it was consideration. Now it looked like something else entirely. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, while her mind replayed every moment she had shared with David. Every dinner, every conversation, every time he had casually asked about her day, her work, her family. Her mother. He had been so interested in Rosa. So compassionate about the dementia diagnosis. So understanding about the financial burden of quality care. He had even helped her research facilities, sitting beside her at this very kitchen table, scrolling through options on his laptop. He had suggested Sunrise Senior Living. The realization hit Elena like a physical blow. She sat up in bed, gasping, her hand pressed against her chest. He had chosen the facility. He had offered to help set up the automatic payments because she was so busy, so overwhelmed with work and Marcus and the weight of watching her mother slowly fade. She had thanked him. She had been grateful. The next morning, Elena called in sick to the hospital for the first time in 12 years. She drove to David's apartment, a sleek high-rise in a gentrified neighborhood downtown. The doorman recognized her and smiled. "Here to see Mr. Chin? I'm afraid he hasn't been home in a few days." "I know. He's traveling. But he asked me to pick up some documents he forgot." The lie came easily, smoothly. Elena was surprised at herself. The doorman hesitated, then shrugged. "I suppose I can let you up. You're on his approved visitor list." The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt endless. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she approached apartment 1407. She still had the spare key David had given her months ago. Another gesture of trust. Another thread in the web he had been weaving around her. The apartment was immaculate. Modern furniture, abstract art on the walls, a stunning view of the city skyline. It looked like something from a magazine, beautiful and completely impersonal. Elena moved through the space systematically, opening drawers, checking cabinets. The kitchen was barely stocked, the refrigerator containing only bottled water and a few containers of takeout. The bathroom had basic toiletries, all generic brands. The bedroom closet held expensive suits, but something about them seemed wrong. She checked the labels. Different sizes. Some were clearly too large for David's lean frame, others too small. As if the clothes had been purchased hastily, without trying them on. Or as if they belonged to different people entirely. In the nightstand drawer, she found a small leather folder. Inside were 3 passports, each with David's photograph but different names. David Chun, Daniel Cameron, Derek Collins. 3 identities. 3 lies. Elena photographed everything, her hands steady despite the storm raging inside her. Then she found the laptop, tucked beneath a stack of financial magazines on the desk. It was password protected, but Elena had watched David type his password dozens of times. He always used the same one, a combination of numbers that she now recognized as her own birthday. The cruelty of that detail made her stomach turn. The laptop contained files. Dozens of them, organized with disturbing precision. Each folder was named with a woman's name and a date range. Margaret Holloway, 2019 to 2020. Patricia Sinclair, 2020 to 2021. Diane Morrison, 2021 to 2022. And finally, Elena Vasquez, 2023 to present. Elena clicked on Margaret's folder first. Inside were photographs, financial documents, property records. A timeline of a relationship, from first meeting to final extraction. Bank statements showing gradual transfers, small amounts at first, then larger. medical records indicating Margaret was in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. And then a death certificate. Margaret Holloway had died in a small private care facility in Nevada, 18 months after David had entered her life. Cause of death was listed as complications from her condition. Elena's blood ran cold. She opened Patricia's folder. The same pattern. A wealthy widow with early cognitive decline. A charming man who appeared at exactly the right moment. A slow, systematic draining of assets. And then another death certificate. Another small, obscure facility. Another set of complications. Diane's folder was identical. 3 women. 3 dead women. All of them isolated, all of them wealthy, all of them suffering from conditions that made them vulnerable, that made their confusion easy to exploit, that made their deaths easy to explain. And now Rosa was missing. Elena drove to Marco's house, breaking at least 4 traffic laws in the process. She didn't care. Every second felt precious now, every moment a countdown toward something terrible that might already have happened. Marco lived in a modest bungalow in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of house that revealed nothing about its occupant. He opened the door before she could knock, as if he had been watching for her. "I found something," Elena said, pushing past him into the living room. "David Chin isn't his real name. He's done this before. 3 times that I know of, probably more." She handed Marco the laptop, watching as he scrolled through the files with growing horror on his weathered face. "These women all died," he said quietly. "In small facilities. Places that wouldn't ask too many questions. Places that could be bought." Elena's voice cracked. "Marco, my mother is in one of those places right now. If she's still alive." Marco closed the laptop and stood. The retired detective was gone. In his place was something harder, something that had spent decades hunting predators who thought they were untouchable. "Then we find her. Tonight. Whatever it takes." Marco worked through the night, calling in favors from contacts Elena didn't know he still had. Former colleagues in the police department. Private investigators who owed him debts. A forensic accountant who specialized in tracing hidden assets. By dawn, they had a lead. Evergreen Holdings LLC, the shell company receiving Elena's payments, was registered to a post office box in Delaware. But the accountant had dug deeper, following the money through a maze of transfers and dummy corporations. The trail led to a property in upstate New York, a small residential care facility called Whispering Pines. "It's not licensed by the state," Marco said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "No inspections, no oversight. On paper, it's listed as a private residence with live-in staff." "A place where people can disappear," Elena whispered. "Exactly." Elena stared at the address on Marco's computer screen. It was nearly 4 hours away, nestled in a remote area of the Catskill Mountains. A perfect location for hiding something. Or someone. "We should call the police," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew it wasn't that simple. Marco shook his head. "With what evidence? A laptop that you technically stole from an apartment you entered without permission? We don't even know for certain your mother is there. The local police would need warrants, probable cause. By the time they cut through the red tape, David Chen could be in another country, and Rosa." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "Then we go ourselves," Elena said. They left at sunrise, taking Marco's old pickup truck, because it was less conspicuous than Elena's luxury sedan. The city fell away behind them, replaced by stretches of highway and then winding country roads. Elena hadn't told Marcus where she was going. She had called her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, and asked her to check on him after school. She had invented a medical emergency at a conference upstate. Another lie, piled on top of all the lies she had been living inside for months. As the miles passed, she thought about her son. 16 years old, already taller than her, with his father's quiet strength and his grandmother's stubborn jaw. She had been so focused on her career, so determined to provide him with every opportunity, that she had missed the danger creeping into their lives. David had been careful around Marcus. Friendly but not too familiar. He had taken them both to baseball games, cooked dinners at Elena's house, slowly inserting himself into the fabric of their family. Marcus had even started to like him. The thought of what David truly was, of what he had been planning all along, made Elena's hands clench into fists. They reached the mountains by early afternoon. The road to Whispering Pines was unpaved, rutted with deep grooves that made the truck bounce and shudder. Dense forest pressed in on both sides, blocking the pale winter sunlight. The facility itself appeared suddenly around a sharp bend. It was a large Victorian house, once grand but now weathered and slightly neglected. A wraparound porch sagged in places, and the paint was peeling from the wooden siding. But smoke rose from the chimney, and several cars were parked in the circular driveway. Marco pulled the truck off the road, hiding it behind a thick stand of pine trees. "We need a plan," he said quietly. "We can't just walk in there." Elena studied the house. 3 stories, probably a dozen rooms at least. Multiple entry points. And they had no idea how many people were inside, or whether they were armed, or what kind of resistance they might face. "I'm a doctor," she said slowly, an idea forming. "Facilities like this, even unlicensed ones, they need medical supplies. Medications. What if I approached as a pharmaceutical representative? A sales call?" Marco considered this. "It might get you through the door. But then what? Then I find my mother. And you call for backup." She pulled out her phone and composed a text message to a number she had memorized years ago. Dr. Samuel Whitfield, the chief of police in the nearest town, was an old colleague from her residency days. They had kept in touch sporadically over the years. She didn't know if he would believe her, didn't know if he would come. But she had to try. The message was brief. "Emergency situation at Whispering Pines facility. Possible elder abuse and fraud. Need immediate assistance. This is Elena Vasquez. I will explain everything, but please trust me." She pressed send and looked at Marco. "Whatever happens in there, don't let them leave. If David Chun is inside, if he tries to run, you stop him." Marco nodded, his hand moving to the old service revolver he had retrieved from his closet before they left. Elena didn't ask if he was prepared to use it. The answer was written in the hard lines of his face. Elena walked up the gravel driveway alone, her heart pounding but her steps steady. She had changed into professional clothes at a rest stop, a blazer and slacks that projected authority. In her hand was a leather briefcase containing nothing but a notepad and the photographs she had taken from David's apartment. The front door was answered by a heavy-set woman in scrubs. Her face was pleasant enough, but her eyes were watchful, calculating. "Can I help you?" "Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, representing Meridian Pharmaceuticals. We specialize in medications for cognitive decline. I understand you provide specialized memory care here." The woman hesitated. "We're not really accepting new vendors at this time." "I completely understand. But we're offering free samples and consultations for qualified facilities. No obligation, no pressure. Just 15 minutes of your time." Elena smiled warmly, the smile she used to reassure anxious patients before surgery. "Your residents deserve access to the latest treatments, don't they?" The appeal to duty worked. The woman stepped aside, allowing Elena to enter. The interior of the house smelled of old wood and something else, a faint chemical undertone that Elena's trained nose immediately recognized. Sedatives. The kind used to keep patients calm and compliant. The kind that, in high enough doses, could slowly shut down organ systems without leaving obvious traces. "I'll get the administrator," the woman said. "Please wait here in the parlor." Elena nodded and watched her disappear down a long hallway. The moment she was out of sight, Elena moved. She slipped through a side door into what appeared to be a former dining room, now converted into a makeshift medical station. Cabinets lined the walls, filled with bottles of medication. She scanned the labels quickly. Sedatives, anti-anxiety drugs, opioids. Far more than any legitimate care facility would need. A sound from above caught her attention. A soft thump, like someone moving slowly across a floor. Elena found the back staircase and climbed, her footsteps silent on the worn carpet. The second floor was a long corridor lined with closed doors. Numbers were painted on each one in faded gold. Behind some, she could hear the soft sounds of breathing, of quiet mumbling. She stopped at the fourth door. Something about it called to her, some instinct she couldn't explain. She turned the handle and pushed it open. The room was small and dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon light. A narrow bed dominated the space, and in it lay a frail figure, impossibly thin, covered with a worn quilt. Elena approached slowly, her throat tight with emotion. The woman in the bed turned her head. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, but somewhere behind the fog of medication, something flickered. "Mija!" The voice was barely a whisper, cracked and weak. But it was unmistakable. "Mama!" Elena fell to her knees beside the bed, tears streaming down her face. "I found you. I'm here. I'm going to take you home." Rosa's hand moved weakly, reaching for her daughter's face. Her skin was paper-thin, her fingers cold. But she was alive. Against all odds, against every terrible possibility Elena had imagined during the long drive, her mother was alive. "I knew," Rosa murmured, her words slurred but clear enough. "I knew you would come." Elena's relief lasted only seconds. Footsteps echoed in the hallway below, heavy and purposeful. Voices rose, sharp with alarm. Someone had discovered she wasn't waiting in the parlor. She leaned close to her mother's ear. "Mama, I need you to stay quiet. Can you do that for me?" Rosa nodded weakly, her eyes clearing slightly with understanding. Even through the fog of sedation, some part of her recognized danger. Elena moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. The drop to the ground was too far, at least 20 feet. But she could see Marco's truck hidden in the trees, and beyond it, dust rising on the distant road. Someone was coming. She prayed it was Samuel and not reinforcements for whoever ran this place. The door burst open behind her. The man standing in the doorway was not David Chen. He was older, perhaps 70, with steel-gray hair and the cold, appraising eyes of someone who viewed human beings as inventory. He wore an expensive suit that seemed absurdly out of place in this decaying house. Behind him stood two younger men, both large, both carrying the rigid posture of hired muscle. "Dr. Vasquez," the older man said smoothly. "I've heard so much about you. David speaks very highly of your generosity." Elena straightened, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Who are you?" "My name is Victor Ashford. I'm David's business partner. And you, I'm afraid, have become a significant problem for our operation." He stepped into the room, glancing at Rosa's motionless form with complete indifference. "Your mother was supposed to be processed months ago, but David insisted on taking his time with you. He said you were special. Processed." The word turned Elena's blood to ice. "You murder them," she said quietly. "You take everything they have, and then you kill them." Ashford smiled, a thin, reptilian expression. "Murder is such an ugly word. We provide a service. These women are already dying, Dr. Vasquez. Their minds are failing, their families are burdened, their assets are sitting idle. We simply accelerate the natural process and redirect those assets to more productive uses. You're a monster. I'm a businessman. There's really very little difference." He nodded to the men behind him. "Restrain her. We'll need to adjust our timeline, but this situation is still salvageable." The two men moved forward. Elena backed against the wall, her mind racing through options. She was not a fighter. She had never thrown a punch in her life. But she was a surgeon, and she understood anatomy better than almost anyone alive. When the first man reached for her, she didn't resist. Instead, she let him grab her arm, let him pull her close. And then she drove her thumb directly into the soft tissue beneath his ear, pressing hard against the vagus nerve. The effect was immediate. His eyes rolled back, his grip loosened, and he crumpled to the floor in a heap. The second man hesitated, surprised by his partner's sudden collapse. That hesitation cost him. Elena grabbed the heavy ceramic lamp from the nightstand and swung it with all her strength. It connected with his temple with a sickening crack, and he went down beside his colleague. Ashford's composure finally broke. His face twisted with rage as he reached into his jacket. "You stupid woman. Do you have any idea what you've—" A gunshot exploded through the room. Ashford stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and spreading. In the doorway stood Marco, his service revolver still smoking, his face carved from stone. "Step away from them," Marco commanded. "Now." Ashford sank to his knees, his arrogance crumbling into pain and disbelief. "You don't understand. David will." "David Chen was arrested 30 minutes ago at JFK Airport," Marco interrupted. "He was trying to board a flight to Singapore with $3 million in bearer bonds and a passport that wasn't his. Turns out the FBI has been looking for him for years under 4 different names." Elena stared at Marco. "How?" "Your friend Samuel. He got your message and made some calls. Apparently, David's real name is Daniel Ashford." Marco gestured toward the wounded man on the floor. "This man's son. They've been running this operation together for almost a decade. At least 9 confirmed victims across 5 states." Victor Ashford's face went gray, and not just from blood loss. The empire he had built on stolen lives and forged signatures was collapsing around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The next hour passed in a blur of sirens and flashing lights. State police flooded the property, followed by paramedics and federal agents. Elena stayed by her mother's side as Rosa was carefully loaded into an ambulance, refusing to let go of her hand even as the EMTs worked around her. She's severely dehydrated and overmedicated, one of the paramedics told her quietly. But her vitals are stable. She's going to need time to recover, but I think she's going to be okay. Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As the ambulance prepared to leave, she saw them bringing Victor Ashford out in handcuffs, his wounded shoulder hastily bandaged. Behind him came a procession of frail, confused elderly patients, some walking, others in wheelchairs. 7 people in total. 7 lives that had been marked for disposal. One of them, a tiny woman with wispy white hair, reached out and caught Elena's sleeve as she passed. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for finding us." The courtroom was packed. Elena sat in the front row, dressed in a simple navy suit, her hands folded in her lap. Beside her was Marcus, who had insisted on attending despite her protests. At 16, he had already grown protective of his mother in ways that made her heart ache with pride and sorrow. Behind them sat the families of the other victims. Some were there to mourn loved ones who hadn't survived the Ashfords' operation. Others were there to witness justice for parents and grandparents who had been saved just in time. Daniel Ashford, the man Elena had known as David Chun, stood at the defendant's table. He was thinner now, diminished by months in custody. Gone was the charming smile, the warm attentiveness, the carefully constructed persona that had fooled so many intelligent, accomplished women. In his place was something hollow, something that had never been real at all. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair, read the verdict in a clear, unwavering voice. On 9 counts of first-degree murder, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On 15 counts of fraud, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On 7 counts of kidnapping, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On 12 counts of identity theft, the jury finds the defendant guilty. The list continued, each charge another brick in the wall that would separate Daniel Ashford from the free world for the rest of his natural life. His father, Victor, had already pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would die in prison regardless. When the final verdict was read, Daniel turned and looked directly at Elena. His expression was unreadable. Was it hatred? Regret? Simple curiosity about the woman who had brought down his empire? Elena held his gaze without flinching. She had spent months replaying their relationship in her mind, searching for the signs she had missed, the warnings she had ignored. The guilt of that blindness had nearly consumed her. But sitting here now, watching justice delivered, she understood something important. Daniel Ashford was not a man who had deceived her. He was a predator who had studied her, learned her vulnerabilities, and exploited them with surgical precision. Her only crime was being human. Her only failing was needing connection. She would not carry his sins on her shoulders. Not anymore. Outside the courthouse, the winter sun was bright but cold as Elena and Marcus descended the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Marco and 2 uniformed officers formed a protective barrier around them. A black town car was waiting at the curb. Inside, Rosa sat wrapped in a warm blanket, watching through the window. She was still frail, still confused on some days, but the poison of overmedication had slowly cleared from her system. Her eyes, when they focused, held the same fierce intelligence that Elena remembered from childhood. Elena slid into the seat beside her mother and took her hand. "Is it over, Mija?" Rosa asked softly. "It's over, Mama. He can't hurt anyone else. Ever again." Rosa nodded slowly, then turned to look at Marcus, who had climbed in on her other side. She reached up and touched his face with trembling fingers. "You have your grandfather's eyes," she murmured. "Strong. Honest. He would be so proud of you." Marcus blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "Thanks, Abuela." The car pulled away from the courthouse, leaving the chaos of reporters and cameras behind. Elena watched the city pass by outside the window, thinking about everything that had changed in the past year. 6 months later, the garden behind Elena's house was in full bloom. She had hired a landscaper to transform the neglected backyard into a sanctuary, with raised beds for vegetables, climbing roses on wooden trellises, and a small patio where Rosa could sit in the afternoon sun. It was Rosa's favorite place now. Every day, weather permitting, she would spend hours there, sometimes reading, sometimes dozing, sometimes simply watching the birds that gathered at the feeders Marcus had installed. Elena found her there on a Saturday morning, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside her. Rosa was more lucid today, her eyes clear and sharp. "Sit with me," Rosa commanded, patting the chair beside her. "We need to talk." Elena obeyed, wondering what was coming. These conversations had become more frequent as Rosa's good days increased. She was determined to say everything she needed to say, while she still could. "I've been thinking about your father," Rosa began. "About how hard he worked to give us a better life. About how he died before he could see what you became." Elena nodded silently. Her father had passed away when she was 12, a heart attack that came without warning. Rosa had raised her alone after that, working double shifts at a garment factory to pay for Elena's private school. "I was so afraid for you," Rosa continued. "So afraid that you would end up like me, struggling, alone, never getting ahead. That's why I pushed you so hard. Why I never let you rest." She paused, her voice thickening with emotion. "I thought if I made you strong enough, nothing could ever hurt you." "Mama, let me finish." Rosa squeezed her daughter's hand. "What that man did to you, it wasn't because you were weak. It was because you were strong. Strong enough to carry everyone else's burdens. Strong enough to keep going even when you were exhausted. He saw that strength and used it against you." Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I should have seen what he was." "No." Rosa's voice was firm. "You saw what he wanted you to see. What he trained himself to show. The fault is his, not yours." She reached up and wiped her daughter's tears with gentle fingers. "You saved me, Elena. You saved all those people. That's who you really are. Not a victim. A warrior." They sat together in the garden for a long time after that, watching the roses sway in the warm breeze, saying nothing because nothing more needed to be said. 1 year later, the Office of Washington and Associates, Victim Advocacy and Asset Recovery, occupied the entire 3rd floor of a renovated building in downtown Los Angeles. Elena had founded the nonprofit with a portion of the settlement money recovered from the Ashfords' seized assets. The organization provided legal assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support to elderly victims of fraud and their families. In its first year of operation, it had helped recover over $12 million in stolen assets and had assisted in prosecuting 17 cases of elder abuse. Elena stood at the window of her corner office, looking out at the city she had called home her entire life. Behind her, the walls were covered with photographs and thank you letters from families she had helped. Each one represented a life saved, a wrong corrected, a predator brought to justice. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Dr. Vasquez? Your 3 o'clock is here." Elena turned to see her assistant standing in the doorway. Behind her was an elderly woman, well-dressed but with the haunted look that Elena had come to recognize instantly. "Please come in," Elena said warmly, gesturing to the comfortable chairs arranged before her desk. "Tell me everything. I'm listening." Some monsters don't lurk in shadows. They stand in the light, wearing perfect smiles and offering exactly what we need most. They study our loneliness, our grief, our exhaustion, and they turn our humanity into a weapon against us. But here's what they never understand. The same heart that makes us vulnerable also makes us unstoppable. The same love that can be exploited can also burn down empires and rebuild what was broken. If you ever find yourself doubting your own judgment, your own worth, remember this. Needing connection doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And being human, truly human, is the greatest strength of all. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to my channel. I share new life stories here every single day. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen, so you can choose what to watch next.